Rain fell in slow, tired sheets, flattening the grass until the whole field looked like a dull mirror. The world had shrunk to sound, the soft hiss of falling water, the rhythm of droplets on the horse's back, the distant hum of thunder that never seemed to come closer. He stood alone near the fence line, head low, his mane plastered dark against his neck. His breath steamed faintly in the cold, curling up and disappearing into the gray. No one had called to him in days. Once, long ago, a whistle had carried over these same hills. Sharp, bright, the kind of sound that belonged to hands that knew how to care for a living thing. But those hands were gone now. The barn was empty, the road overgrown. The gate had fallen open months ago. He could have left. He never did. The rain had become his keeper. Beyond the field, the old farmhouse sagged against the wind. Its windows were black, the roof bowed with years. Water streamed from the gutter in a thin line that carved a small trench through the mud. The horse watched it for a long time, as though it meant something. The way water always found a path, even through the hardest ground. He shifted his weight, one hoof sinking deeper into the soft soil. The air smelled of wet hay and rusted wire. A crow cawed somewhere unseen, and the sound carried far across the plain before vanishing into the distance. He listened, but nothing answered. The rain thickened. It rolled down his face, along the bridge of his nose, into the earth. He closed his eyes. Once there had been voices here. Laughter, the scrape of boots, the low rhythm of another heartbeat beside his own. He remembered the sound of a boy's hand slapping his flank, the scent of apples in a coat pocket. Memory had weight. He carried it like tack he couldn't shed. The boy had called him by name once, soft, steady, like a promise. He couldn't remember the word now. Only the tone. It had faded with the seasons, until the field forgot to echo it back. By nightfall, the storm deepened. Lightning stitched pale threads across the horizon, far beyond the hills. He turned his head toward it. For a heartbeat, the flash caught in his eyes. Bright, wild, alive. Then, the dark returned. He moved toward the fence, each step heavy with mud. When he reached it, he stopped, the broken rail just high enough to lean his neck across. Water ran down his muzzle, dripping into the puddle below. His reflection shimmered and broke with each drop. He waited for the sound of footsteps, for the voice that used to come with them. None came, only rain. When dawn rose pale and thin, the field was silver. Mist hung low, clinging to the ground. The farmhouse looked smaller now, like a photograph left too long in the sun. The horse stood where he had all night, unmoving, patient. The world had forgotten his name, but the earth still knew his weight. And as the first weak light touched his back, he turned his head slightly, as though listening for something buried in the rain, a sound half memory, half hope, and the field, for the first time in years, seemed to breathe with him. By the second day, the rain had turned soft. Less storm, more memory. It came down like breath now, a quiet rhythm against the earth. The horse moved closer to the fence, drawn by the scent of something that didn't belong. Smoke, faint and dry, curling through the damp. It wasn't the smell of fire from the hills or lightning-struck wood. It was smaller, closer, a human kind of smoke. He lifted his head, ears flicking forward. Through the mist, near the road that bordered the field, a shape moved. A man, walking slowly, his coat dark with rain. The man carried a small bundle strapped to his back, maybe tools, maybe nothing at all, and a stick he used like a cane. His steps were steady, deliberate, as if each one mattered. When he reached the fence, he stopped. The horse didn't move. The man looked across the field, eyes narrowing through the drizzle. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a hat, but his breath came out in thin clouds. "Didn't expect to see anything living out here," he said, voice rough from cold. The horse flicked his ears, but stayed still. The man leaned against the post. "You alone?" The words hung in the air, soft as rain. No answer came, of course. Just the sound of drops, sliding from the horse's mane to the mud below. The man followed the line of the fence with his hand. Old wood, slick with moss, one rail missing where the storm had taken it. He crouched, picking at the mud with a stick. Used to be a farm here, I remember the name, he frowned. Can't recall it now. The horse shifted, one hoof sinking deeper into the soft ground. The man looked up at him. You waiting for someone? The horse blinked. Rain traced down his jaw, gathered at his chin, fell. I know that kind of waiting, the man said quietly. For a long time, neither moved. The wind came up, bending the grass. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crust of bread, half wrapped in paper. He broke a piece off, held it up. You look like you'd remember the taste of this. He tossed it lightly over the fence. It landed in the mud near the horse's front hooves. The horse sniffed it once, then again. The smell was faint beneath the rain, but real. Grain, warmth, salt. He lowered his head slowly and took it between his teeth. Chewed, swallowed. The man smiled, small and tired. Thought so. He sat down against the fence post, his back to the wood, legs stretched out in the mud. The horse watched him, the faint sound of chewing giving way to quiet again. You know, the man said, my father used to have one like you. Big. Chestnut. He'd talk to him more than he talked to me. He laughed once, under his breath. Guess that made sense. He pulled his hat lower, eyes half closed. Funny thing about land like this, it remembers everything except names. The rain fell steady again, washing over both of them. The man leaned his head back and let it. The horse took one slow step forward, closer to the fence, and exhaled, a long, low breath that rolled like thunder beneath the quiet. The man opened his eyes. They looked at each other across the narrow strip of fence. One creature that had forgotten who he belonged to, and another who no longer belonged anywhere. For a moment, the world stopped shrinking. When the rain eased, the man stood. He patted the fence post twice, as though saying goodbye to something that could understand it. Well, he said softly, you take care of this place, old friend. He adjusted his coat, turned toward the road, and began to walk. The horse watched until the man's shape disappeared into the fog. Then, he lowered his head to the fence post. The man had touched and pressed his muzzle against the wet wood. The scent of smoke still lingered there, faint, warm, human. The rain began again, light as breath. The field was quiet, but the horse didn't feel alone. Not that day. And when the thunder came hours later, rolling low across the valley, he turned toward the sound, as if listening for footsteps on the road, for a voice that might one day speak his name again. The third night after the man had gone, the rain stopped. Not gently, not fading. It simply ended, as if someone had taken the sound out of the world. The field lay heavy with water. Puddles mirrored the bruised sky, and the air hung damp and metallic. The horse lifted his head and sniffed the wind. Something had changed. He smelled smoke again. It came from the east, faint but sharp, threading through the scent of wet earth. Not the kind of smoke that clung to old barns or drifted from a faraway village. This was new, clean, living, the breath of a small fire. He turned toward it. The fog along the hills had thinned enough to show a dim orange glow near the horizon. Small, flickering, moving. The horse stepped forward, hooves sinking into the soaked ground. Each stride pulled at the earth like a slow heartbeat. Water splashed against his legs. Reeds bent and sprang up again behind him. He walked until the fence no longer lined his path, until the field gave way to the low ridge that overlooked the road. The light was clearer here, a tiny fire sheltered by the remains of a fallen tree. Beside it sat the man. He was crouched low, his coat drawn around his shoulders, hat pulled forward to shield the flame. The fire barely lived, just a whisper of heat fighting against the wind. The horse stopped at the crest of the hill and watched. The man didn't see him at first. He fed the fire carefully, breaking small branches, letting them catch, never rushing. His face was lined in the glow, tired but calm. When he finally looked up, his eyes caught the movement. He froze. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across the rain-soaked dark, one shape of firelight, one of muscle and shadow. Then, the man stood slowly. Well, he said softly, voice almost swallowed by the night. Didn't think you'd come looking for me. The horse blinked, ears forward. The man took a step closer. Or maybe it's the other way around. He reached into his coat and drew out something wrapped in cloth, another crust of bread, a small apple bruised at the edge. He placed them on a flat stone between them, then stepped back. The horse came forward, cautious but unafraid. The firelight danced across his wet coat, turning it to bronze. He lowered his head, sniffed, and took the apple. The sound of teeth against fruit broke the stillness like an old song returning. The man smiled faintly. Guess I'm not completely forgotten yet. They stayed there for a long time. The fire hissed each time a drop of rain fell from the trees above. The man spoke little, just enough for his voice to stay alive in the air. He told the horse how the road was long, how the next town had roofs that leaked and fields that no longer grew. He said the earth had changed, or maybe it was people who had forgotten how to listen to it. The horse chewed quietly, head low. He didn't understand the words, but he knew the tone, the steady rhythm of a voice that wasn't trying to command, only to remember. When the fire burned down to coals, the man lay back against the trunk and sighed. Funny thing, he murmured, how we keep coming back to the same places, thinking they'll still know us. The wind carried his words away into the tall grass. The horse stepped closer until the heat of the dying fire brushed his legs. He lowered his head once more, exhaling softly near the man's shoulder. A breath shared in the dark. The man didn't move. He only closed his eyes and whispered, "Good night, friend." When morning came, mist covered the field again. The fire was out, only ash left on the stone. The man was gone. But in the mud near where he had slept, the horse found a print, the clear, perfect mark of a hand pressed into the wet earth. He stood over it for a while, then looked toward the horizon where the road disappeared. The sky was gray again, but the air smelled faintly of smoke and of something else, the memory of being called. He took a slow step forward, toward the smell, toward the road, toward the warmth still echoing in the air. The field behind him was silent. It would remember the sound of rain, the weight of hooves, and the faint scent of fire long after both of them were gone. It would forget his name, as fields always do. But the earth, in its quiet way, would keep his story. The fog didn't lift that morning. It thinned, then gathered again, shifting like breath. The horse stood on the edge of the field, staring at the place where the man's fire had burned. The earth was still darker there, a patch of warmth buried under the scent of ash. He lowered his head, sniffed the ground, then turned toward the road. The fence that had once held him stood broken, half swallowed by mud. Beyond it stretched a narrow path, the kind that didn't lead anywhere, just faded into the gray horizon and waited to be remembered. He stepped over the last rail and began to walk. The road wasn't made for hooves anymore. It had cracked in places, weeds growing through it, puddles collecting in shallow dips. Each step made a dull splash, the sound vanishing into the mist before it could echo. But beneath that silence was something deeper, a rhythm, a sound that wasn't quite there, but wasn't gone either. The faint pulse of old journeys, still humming under the surface. He walked for hours, or maybe longer. The light didn't change much. Morning bled into noon, and the gray sky never shifted color. Somewhere in the distance, crows called. Their voices carried low, blending with the slow, steady beat of his hooves. For the first time in years, the sound of walking didn't feel lonely. He followed the scent of smoke until it faded into wind. Then, he followed the memory of it. Every so often, the road curved, revealing pieces of the world that had forgotten to be alive. An old sign half buried in grass, a fence swallowed by vines, a rusted wagon wheel leaning against a tree. He passed them all, steady and patient. Once, he stopped beside a ditch filled with water and looked down. His reflection stared back, blurred by the ripples. He blinked, and for a heartbeat, another shape seemed to stand beside him. A figure with a hat, hand on his neck. He looked up quickly. No one, only wind. The reflection was gone when he looked back. Toward evening, he reached a bend in the road where the ground rose slightly. From there, he could see the hills beyond the valley, faint silhouettes under a silver sky. Something stirred in the grass ahead. A sound. Footsteps. He froze, ears flicking. The air was still for a moment, then split softly with the crunch of gravel. The man appeared, walking the road from the opposite side of the hill. His coat was dry now, though torn at the edge. His pack looked lighter. He stopped when he saw the horse. "Well," he said quietly, "I didn't think you'd find me." The horse took one step forward, then another. When they met in the middle of the road, the man reached out a hand. The horse lowered his head, and the man rested his palm against the wet curve of his muzzle. The world around them went quiet, the kind of silence that carries weight, the kind that belongs to things returning to their place. "You remember me, don't you?" the man whispered. "Even if I don't remember my own way back." The horse breathed slow and deep, his breath mingling with the man's. It didn't matter who remembered what. The road did. That night, they stayed by the ridge together. The man built another fire, small and steady. The horse stood close, the smoke curling through his mane. Neither spoke. One couldn't, the other didn't need to. The sound of crackling wood and slow rain filled the space between them. When the man finally lay down, the horse remained beside him, eyes half closed, head lowered toward the light. The road stretched out before them, endless and empty, but not forgotten. It had waited years for the sound of footsteps and hooves. Now they had returned. When morning came, they began to walk again. Together, the man leading, the horse following. The fog lifted a little, revealing faint color in the grass, a shimmer in the air, where sunlight tried to break through. And as they moved down the road, their shadows stretched long behind them. One man, one horse, and the faint impression of the field still breathing in their wake. The road curved down through the valley, where the mist gathered like a second sky. By noon, the light had thinned, pale as paper, and the sound of water reached them from far ahead, soft, slow, patient. The man stopped on the ridge and listened. The horse paused beside him, ears turning toward the sound. "It's still here," the man said quietly. His voice carried no surprise, only something that might have been relief or regret. The river. It ran beneath the hills, cutting a thin gray scar through the land. The bridge that crossed it had once been stone, but the years had worn it smooth, the edges softened by moss and rain. The horse took a few steps forward, hooves sinking into the mud where the road ended. The man followed, resting a hand on his flank. Together they approached the water. The river moved slowly as if tired from its own memory. It was shallow here, only deep enough to swallow reflections, not bodies. The surface trembled, catching the faint light and breaking it into thousands of small, shifting mirrors. The man crouched by the edge, his reflection beside the horse's. Both figures rippled, blurred, and reformed, man and animal bound by movement and silence. He reached down, letting his fingers touch the surface. The water was cold enough to sting. "I buried him here," he said softly. "Long time ago." The horse lifted his head, eyes fixed on the water. "My brother," the man continued. "He drowned trying to save one of the foals when the river flooded. The field took him. So did the rain." He paused. "That's when I left." The horse stood motionless, as if he understood, or maybe he simply knew the sound of sorrow when it came without fear. The wind shifted. A single leaf broke free from the bank and drifted across the surface. The man followed it with his eyes until it disappeared under the bridge. He stood, wiping his hands against his coat. The bridge stretched ahead, dark and slick with moss. The arches reflected perfectly below, a circle of stone and silence. He hesitated at the edge. The horse brushed against him, a quiet weight at his shoulder. "All right," he whispered. "We'll cross together." The first step echoed faintly, the hollow sound of wood beneath stone, of something holding though it shouldn't. The man led, slow and steady. The horse followed, careful, each hoof landing between cracks of the worn planks. The river's murmur rose around them. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space between heartbeats. Halfway across, the man stopped and turned. The valley behind them was fading into fog again. The road they'd followed was already gone, a pale scar vanishing into distance. He took a deep breath. "There's nothing left back there, is there?" The horse shifted his weight, one hoof scraping against the stone. The man smiled faintly. "Didn't think so." He faced forward again. "Then, it's just us." On the far side of the bridge, the land opened into a wide plain. Grass grew taller here, greener despite the season, and the scent of rain lingered in the soil. The man stopped once more to look at the water below. For a moment he thought he saw something, a faint figure in the reflection beneath the arch. A boy's outline standing barefoot in the river, hand raised in greeting. He blinked. The image broke apart in the ripples. When he looked again, there was only water. He turned to the horse. "He's gone, isn't he?" The horse lowered his head, exhaling softly, the warm breath curling into the cold air like smoke. The man nodded once. "Yeah, but maybe not forgotten." They moved on. The bridge faded behind them, its shape swallowed by mist. The river ran quiet, but if anyone had been there to listen, they might have heard it, faintly, between the ripples. The rhythm of hooves echoing through the stone, as if the road itself was speaking back, as if it remembered every name ever spoken along its edge. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, the man stopped and looked toward the light. It touched the horse's wet coat, turning it the color of copper. He reached up, ran a hand down the animal's neck. "You know," he said softly, "I think I remember what they called you." The horse turned his head slightly, eyes steady and calm. The man smiled, not wide, not certain, but true. It was Echo. He let the word hang there, let the air take it. The horse flicked his ears once, then pressed his muzzle gently against the man's shoulder. The sound that rose from his throat wasn't a whinny, wasn't a sigh. Something between them, quiet and endless, carried away on the wind. And for the first time in years, the field, the river, and the road all remembered the same name. Not as a word, but as a sound that stayed long after silence.